The only thing I know about startups is that they're statistically likely to fail. And so if you start with the premise that it's statistically likely to fail, you say, well, for the ones that are successful, what makes them successful? And it's, are they in the right categories? Do they have the right investors? And then do they have the right team and the team dynamics?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Built Not Born, the startup go-to-market podcast by Venture Guides. I'm Sage Nye, and around here, we believe that great companies are built, not born, one smart decision at a time. Each week, we take you through real conversations with founders, investors, and go-to-market experts on what it really takes to land customers and scale your startup. Now, let's get to work. Hello, and welcome to Built Not Born, the podcast where we dive into the real stories behind startup execution, venture capital, and go-to-market strategy. I'm Sage Nye, venture partner at Venture Guides. Today, we're joined by Corey Thomas, Chairman and CEO of Rapid7, a cybersecurity company that he's scaled from startup to successful IPO, now serving over 11,000 customers globally. What makes Corey's journey so remarkable is that he didn't just step into the leadership role once Rapid7 had scaled. He was there from the early days of company building and has held key roles across all aspects of go-to-market. Along the way, he's focused on the benefits of a diverse workforce, navigated massive go-to-market shifts, evolving cultures, and today's ever-changing dynamics in the technology and venture capital markets. Corey has also been chairman of the Boston Fed, board member of LPL Financial, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, and Vanderbilt University. Recently, he was also named the 9th most influential person in Boston by Boston Magazine. Corey has been a close friend of the Venture Guides team since before the founding of the firm, and we could not be more excited to hear his perspective on early company building. Corey, welcome to the show.
Sage, I'm so happy to join you.
You've been at Rapid7 for 16 years now, started from VP of marketing and now leading the company as CEO for more than a decade. I would love to start with, why did you first join Rapid7?
Oh, you're taking me way back in time. So, when I was first looking at Rapid7, like many people, I was trying to figure out what my second at the time executive job would be. I had spent a career in larger companies. I had done one startup before, and I was looking for two things. One, I wanted to find a company that had the right products in a category that I thought I was good at. So B2B software, cybersecurity was interesting. Two, I was looking for a founding and investing team that was going to be strong. So I was looking at lots of the intangibles more than anything else, because I actually think that that's the stuff, the only thing I know about startups is that they're statistically likely to fail. And so if you start with the premise that it's statistically likely to fail, you say, well, for the ones that are successful, what makes them successful? And it's, are they in the right categories? Do they have the right investors? And then do they have the right team and the team dynamics? So I joined Rapid7 because it had those intangibles at the time. It had sort of like, Ben Nye's investment team. It had a great set of co-founders. It had a product category that I thought was going to be explosive. And to me, that said, okay, we could defy the odds. We ultimately did, but it wasn't a sure shot. But that's why I originally joined Rapid7, was for the intangibles.
And what advice would you give other individuals that are thinking about or looking into joining a startup?
Yeah, so I think that there's one, I always start with the self. It's like, you have to really understand yourself, your motivation, your drop. I would say too many people do it for the wrong reasons today. And sometimes the wrong expectations. So an example of sort of like the wrong reasons to do it is just like, hey, it's an easy path to actually like wealth and success, and it's going to be easy. I'm just like, you haven't spent enough time with startups. And like, I spend time talking at different business schools and stuff like that. And people like, it's in vogue. The right reasons to do it is you like to build, you like to create, you like to do something with others, and you're wanting to go on the journey. And it really is going to be a journey. You say sort of like built, not born, but it is a journey. Like building something's a journey around it. So the mentality matters, because if you go in there expecting an entitlement, then that's the easiest path to failure. So the first thing I actually tell people is that, like, look at your own job and motivation. You got to want to be in it for the exploration. You got to want to be in it for the learning, and you got to be in it, want to be as part of a team that makes change happens. And so motivation matters, and the motivation and the reasons for that matters. The second thing that I would actually tell people that are considering it is do their homework. Not enough people actually really do their homework. And I think what you want to find is a mix of things that actually can leverage your skills and expertise, but also stretch you in interesting ways. And then the third thing is, I would just say, pay attention to the intangibles. So your homework will tell you about the market. The intangibles, you got to talk to the people, meet the investors. You got to see if these are the people that you actually want to go create something in a hostile environment. That's kind of how I think about it. It's just like we're building and creating in an unforgiving environment. And if you find the right set of people, you can have fun doing that.
That's awesome. And when we talk about the journey, your journey within Rapid7 has changed a lot over time. I think you started in marketing, you quickly rose to COO, and eventually took over as CEO. How does the different roles that you've held impact your perspective that you have now?
Yeah, so I've held a lot of roles. I'll remind people a couple different things. I think sometimes people are a little bit too obsessed with title and responsibility and the linear growth. And they expect it to look like a stair ladder. I got the advice early in my career is to be focused on actually being great at the job, you get it, not how fast you can actually get the job. And so like, how do you get the challenge that I was given early on was how do I become excellent in the job that I aspire to have, not how do I actually get the job as quickly as possible. So I'll point out before I came to Rapid7, I had one pay cut. I took another pay cut to join Rapid7 for the opportunity. So I took like 2 pay cuts in a row. One was a lateral move. In Rapid7, you talked about the career path that I went on. But when I became COO, because sales was such a big challenge, I actually gave up marketing and engineering just to actually focus on sales for a year. And so my scope actually sort of like changed and narrowed, and then it expanded again. I share that story because I do think that sometimes it's easy to have a tendency to expect things to be linear. And really we have to say like, what's the most important thing for us to be doing any day and time? Like when I work with executives right now, I always say like, are we actually spending our time on the things that matter most? Or are we spending our time on the things that actually gratify our egos? And so for myself, as I've done sort of like my responsibilities have ebbed and flowed over time, but it's always been about how do I spend the time on the things that actually matter the most for the organization.
That's awesome. And I think to that point, one thing that we see a lot is expectation that there is segmentation. You are either in sales or marketing or product or whatever it is. And they miss the sort of cross department, cross silo.
Which is where all the great leadership happens. I mean, like that is the definition of leadership. Like, and that's where the magic is born.
Especially in the early days, it's so critical to have that integrating role. I'd be curious, as you shifted and you mentioned taking over sales and then getting more responsibilities again, did you find that helped you play the integrating role? Were you already playing it ahead of time? Or what advice can you give founders that are trying to break down the silos?
I was already playing ahead. So one, I just think the advice I would give founders is mentality matters a lot when you actually hire, especially early on. The earlier on you're looking for, the more important it is to actually have people that have high aptitude, people that are rapid learners, massive curiosity and interest, and people that like to actually play as a team. I think that when people actually just play in there's this trick. So you have to be accountable to your sandbox. Like, I'm a product person, I have to deliver great products. I have to deliver great user experience. I have to deliver that. And so there's a tendency sometimes that like, okay, my contribution is I'm going to go spend time in someone else's sandbox. And that can feel like I'm actually sort of like throwing stones. I'm not being constructive. And you can create a toxic dynamic there. What takes all of that away is founders have to actually find ways to actually, and by the way, you have to do this at every level of companies, is to create, and I have to do it right now. I'm doing this right now, is actually to create strong teaming dynamics where people are playing part of a larger team, where the time that I spend outside of my quote unquote function is in supporting someone else. The other part of that is how do I actually have my function support someone else? So like, the mentality that I always check is that like every single person has responsibility for like, so as a product owner, I am responsible for the win rate of my product. I'm responsible for like how easy to sell. Is it, I still have this conversation today. Is it a nuanced sell or is the differentiation clear? Oftentimes, like very smart founders or engineers, like, well, I can actually go sell this and I can actually go do this, but they don't answer the question about like, okay, is it a nuanced thing that only the founder or the engineering team can do? or can anyone do it? Well, you're part of sales. You're part of marketing. Like part of your product job is to do it. Likewise, if I'm in marketing, part of my job is to work with product to tell a great story and work with sales to make sure this story is consumed. Part of my sales job is to help with competitive information and to go back to product. So we all actually can actually support other teams, but we need to actually think about our base. I think about it as just like, like I think about baseball. Like, yes, I actually may play sort of like, I may be a pitcher, but I run the first base when I actually need to. And we actually have to be able to actually move around, but think about how do I do my role well, but then how does my job make it easier for the rest of my team to actually get their work done? And so mentality matters and teamwork matters for that.
And that's a remarkable thing that a remarkable skill that you've had for a long time is building a team that is willing to go fill in, run to first base if they need to, and all of that. So are there key traits that you look for when you're interviewing candidates? How do you think about building a team?
Yes, there's look, I think you're looking for skills, which are important, aptitude, but then attitude is the way to think about it. One of the things that I am looking for in the attitude, which tends to be the trickier thing to actually get through in interviews, is the impact over ego mentality. Is that where have people done things that they did not get credit for, that actually made the larger team better? So I'm hunting for those. And I'll just say it's hard to pull out because you're in an interview and people are actually looking for it. But you can actually get it into how people talk about these stories. You can get it through sort of like the life experience aspect. I'm looking at sort of like where have people actually done things that may not have been great for them, but made the overall team better. And is that their home base? And look, there's some very talented people, and sometimes you actually need them on your team that are great at what they do, massive horsepower, have lots of sort of like brain stems, but they may be mediocre on that social connection, that team dynamic. I do spend a fair amount of time looking at what's the mentality of the people that want to actually win as a team, and how much of that is sort of like ego trip. And by the way, we all have to have healthy egos. There's nothing wrong with the healthy ego. The question is that a healthy ego? Is it the like, I always say like, do you want to actually win more than look good? And some people actually have a higher drive to look good than to actually win. And what I'm looking for is like people that have healthy egos, but they really, really do sort of like care about like the team winning more than anything else.
I was talking to a sales leader the other day who talked about humble confidence. Just a good idea. Yeah.
You need confidence. You need a healthy amount of ego. Like, it's not toxic ego, but healthy ego. That's not a bad thing at all.
The first key hires you make as a founder can be so critical. When they're trying to interview many candidates, it sounds like what you're saying is there's a balance between, having experience, being able to sort of run on your own, and also the right mentality and being able to fit in a team. Would the advice be any different to a founder that maybe doesn't have a leadership team yet in terms of what to look for?
My advice, the script that I give lots of sort of CEOs that don't have leadership teams, is to do a lot of actually talking first to people that have actually done it. So like I tell them to, before they actually start hiring, to actually go out and, leverage their venture capital partners, go out on LinkedIn, but find people who've been successful in those roles at other companies that are analogous. Look, you'll send out it's good practice cold calling. You'll send out like 10 requests on LinkedIn, but you'll get like 2 or 3 people that have actually done the job that you're trying to hire for somewhere else, and just say, listen, I'm trying to hire for this thing. It doesn't have to be you. I would just love your advice about what you think it takes to be successful in that role. And so doing the homework is actually going out, and I still do this with roles. I actually talk to people about like, all right, what does it take what does a winner look like in this? I'm going through this thing right now where I'm trying to hire someone, and I'm actually reached out to like a couple people and say like, hey, I know you don't want to do this role here and you're happy, but can you just talk to me about like what I should be looking for in this role? And people are often willing to actually share their wisdom. They're often willing to actually share their time, and it helps you build a perspective about like what you should ask for, what you should look for. And then, at the end of that call, I tell founders to ask them, so like, what are like 2 people that you think I should go interview for if you know them, or what are actually sort of another person you think I should get advice from? But like building up that is actually a great way to actually, because part of being a founder is you're having to actually manage things that you have no experience or skill set around. And so, like, well, how do you actually do that? Is that you actually build your network and you build your understanding of people that are actually good for that. And then sometimes I've asked for those people, like, hey, would you mind interviewing this person for me, giving you and giving me your perspective on them? So that's kind of the advice I actually give founders is to actually do the homework, get the advice, get the perspective, but do it from an outside in approach versus just thinking that you're going to be good at something you've actually never ever done before.
Makes a lot of sense, particularly when you think about technical founders looking at sales and marketing roles. All right, so for a little bit of a shift, it's hard to imagine Rapid7 as a small company today, but at one point you were. We would love to hear a little bit about some of the early days, and maybe we could start with, one of the first big customer wins. Doesn't have to be named, but can you share a major customer from the early days and how the team came together to help close them?
I think it was 2010, maybe. We have been actually like chasing this customer. They were in a competitor for a long time. And look, all things, what thing you learn early on is that like competitive wins have like two things. It's one, you learn a lot from them. Two, if you can actually win it, it's a major morale boost. This actually required doing two things. It's one, it actually was a long sales cycle. We actually had to really get to know the customer, get to know their requirements, and actually spend a fair amount of time with our engineering leader at the time and our product teams because they were like mildly dissatisfied, but did not have an urgency to actually move. So it took a while to actually get them warmed up to actually do the sale, do the transaction. The second thing that we actually did is we invited them in and said, listen, we just want your perspective. We want to actually sell to you at some point in time, but really what we actually want is that like you to actually help make us better. You'll be surprised at how often people really resonate and respond to like I want to actually make people better. There's a lot of really good people out there. And this gentleman, try not to say the name, was fantastic about like giving the advice in time. But guess what? Once he saw we were taking the advice, we were actually taking the perspective, he got invested. Now you have to be careful that you actually are not building into a universe of one. But the stuff that he was looking at, we didn't do everything, but we actually looked the stuff that actually looked like it resonated with lots of other customers, and that built credibility. And so we built the reputation as being both market driven and credible. And we came in, and he eventually switched over. But really, what built the relationship up was we were listening, we were engaged. We did not do everything because you cannot you can't build some like custom software for everyone. But we did the stuff that we actually thought resonated with other customers and that was validated with other customers. And that built the credibility of both listening and engagement. And they switched over, and they actually sent us, the reason I remember it is that like it was a big win, but they sent us some fun gifts in return for the win, which is kind of fun.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we talk about a lot is remember that there's a person on the other end of the phone, right?
I like to remind our teams of is that you're dealing with humans who actually genuinely want to be valuable to their organizations and they want to do good work. And so if we frame ourselves and we are actually helping them do good work and demonstrate that they've done good work, that's half the battle.
As companies are moving up market and targeting more enterprise customers, sales teams start getting inundated with feature requests. And do you have any advice for founders to sort of balance the feature requests and closing the accounts without distracting everyone? And looks like yes.
Yes. And by the way, we still deal with this to this day. So we've done good jobs and bad jobs. I just recently assessed that we're doing a poor job of this now. And so we're going back in. And so it's a very real thing. But it happens at every stage of every company's life cycle. So it's happened early on, it happened mid stage, it happened later stage. So I don't think it's something that goes on. So building the muscle around it is important. So I would just say, listen, the first and foremost thing is you should pay attention and listen deeply, and not listen with an appeasement mindset. And so I think that one of the things that people often make a mistake of is that I think you can, they're like, oh, I'm inundated with requests. And so they filter it out, or they think about like how to manage the request, and they actually stop engaging. So the first thing that I do, like I'm going through this right now, is that like is engage about the why and have the discussion with the customer. So like, one of the things that we do, we have our customer advisory board meeting, and like we'll go next meeting and say, well, this is what we've heard from you. All right, here's what we're actually working on and why we're actually working on. Here's what we actually heard that's actually different. Um, Help us understand, because we're trying to figure out like what we should actually focus on. And and you don't have to do this in a customer advisory board, but guess what? People like engagement. And so what happens is that like it is not actually quality engagement to take a list and then go back into your mad laboratory and actually sort of like come up with, like, I got 100 things and I can do 10, and I'm going to come up with this 10, and then I'm going to do some other stuff like that. They're missing an opportunity to actually engage as they go up. And there's only so much time you actually have. But the point on the engagement is not to be time consuming. So like if people ask them the why behind it, what they're trying to try, ask them about like, okay, that's interesting. I'm having a hard time about thinking about this relative to this, or what order or what sequencing. Oftentimes, I tell customers like, I agree with you, but like I was thinking about this as a first thing for this, or this in this way. How would you think about it? Help me understand. Or is this but like the engagement actually matters, because guess what? When people engage and they know that you're listening, they're often, one, you get some valuable feedbacks about how to think about the things. You actually just turn the customer into a partner, but you've gotten some rich context. And you actually have the ability and the permission to go back and say, like, listen, I've decided to do this thing in this order. Here's the thing. But often people understand if you're actually doing quality engagement. So I would just say, don't miss the engagement window. Two, I would just say you'll have to actually develop the skill set to separate out what's specific to a customer versus what's generic to multiple customers. And that's where you have to be curious. So like, the thing that I'm always looking for is the big buckets that I'm filtering for when it comes in is sort of like, is this customer specific or is this broadly addressable specific? And then what sequencing and which order is checking on? I have all of those customers questions with all of those discussions with customers as they come along. But at the end of the day, you do not want to become a custom development shop. Your job is to figure out, when things come in, which of the things you're listening for that are most broadly addressable and that will make you the most distinctive. And that's where you actually want to hone in on. It is okay. Also, customers know that you have limited resources, and reminding them that you need help focus is going to be well received 90% of the time.
That's great advice. And another question we have is, as companies grow, people make mistakes. Everyone's person, things happen. I think figuring out how to learn from mistakes is the critical piece. And a lot of that is engaging with the mistakes, to your point about engagement. Could you share a mistake that Rapid7 made in the early days and how you recognized it and what you learned from it?
Oh, we made so many mistakes over time. So I made a mistake in how I actually set up our European headquarters, which was, we're trying to do international expansion. I picked the wrong sales approach, wrong model, wrong geography. And so that was a mistake. I had to do a complete redo. And I had to consider sunk costs. I had to go back in and I had to go rebuild from scratch. In that case, what we did was we didn't completely decommission, but I think we did decommission the office. What we did is we took a lot of time to go in and talk to other companies that have been successful doing a European expansion and say like, all right, what did we actually mess up? What did we actually get wrong? How do we think about it? It's because we had a simplistic view. It was just a location. But it wasn't just the location. It was actually the model and the approach that we had. Like we allocated money in the wrong ways. We actually spread ourselves too thin. We did not build a great home base of operations. And so going out and talking to others that had been successful was the big aha there. And then we had to take another swing at the bat. But we wasted a lot of money in that process. We had a bunch of sort of like, I would just say 2 material acquisitions that were just complete duds, that just didn't work out. And it was, one of the things is we had to redo like our acquisition criteria. And I'm going through two different phases of sort of like not nailing that. And so like, each time you have to actually say like, okay, what did I learn from it? What's my criteria? What's my diligence? What's the approach behind it? But again, a similar model, we went out and looked and said like, all right, how do other companies do this well? What do we think about? So in the last one, which wasn't early, the first one that was early stage, we did not properly get enough customer feedback about like where the market was going. So we made a bad market call and we just did not get enough customer feedback and validation. So we added the customer feedback and validation in subsequently. Most recently, we did not focus on commercialization enough. And so like, what does it take to sell it? And there, so like, one of the tests that I do now is that I won't sort of like, do an acquisition that doesn't involve the sales team signing up for a quota in advance of it. And the reason I highlight these is not that early stage companies actually going to actually necessarily do an acquisition, although we did acquisitions when we were very early stage. Like we did like a very successful acquisition, which was Metasploit early stage, where we did it out of our marketing budget, and not a series of not so successful acquisitions. So, it really depends. But the point is, you're inevitably going to have screw ups. If you're defensive about the screw ups, whether they're about sort of like technology direction, whether they're about people, if you're defensive about it for too long, then it's going to fester. And so the thing is to ask yourself why honestly, and to actually then go out and say like, all right, how can I assess this? And then how can I correct it? And then you can move past it.
And I do think a common theme that's coming up is you spend a lot of time learning from people who have done it before. And it doesn't necessarily mean you do the exact same thing that they've done, but at least learn from what have people tried and what can we iterate on.
Look, there's so much you can actually get from outside of yourself and outside of the people in your company. And it's actually free by and large. Like, like you can just go ask people lots of questions and do your homework. Like, doing your homework is a thing time and time again that matters.
There's another point here about non-obvious decision making and learning from everyone, but maybe learning in terms of that's something I don't want to do. When Rapid7 was still building and some of the go-to-market strategy was potentially less obvious, do you have any sort of examples or stories around the non-obvious decision making that were made that ended up setting Rapid7 apart and what went into that?
Yes, there's two phases of non-obvious decision making. One was we were tiny and we were like number 6 and we did not have brand position. And we acquired Metasploit. It was an open source framework that had great brand position. And like, I literally spent my entire marketing budget to acquire the company for the year. And I remember having the discussion. It's so like very not obvious. Like it's like you're gonna buy an open source thing that has no revenue, but they had like a legion mechanism where people download it. They had a great brand, and I'm like, listen, the number one thing is like our brand is not recognized. Like no one really knows it. And it was controversial at the time. And so, but yeah, it's non-obvious to spend your entire, and I was out of marketing budget. Like there was no more coming. Like that was like the entire marketing budget. Where the, it did solve our biggest thing is we were on the map. We went from not on the map to on the map, and we were on the map, and it created stories that our sales teams could go talk about and do, and we could translate that, and then we followed that up with the execution around the enablement about like how that was going to drive our products and how we were championing them. And it worked. But it was definitely it was definitely non-linear, non-obvious at the time that we actually had to go that we actually had to go do it. Another one was, this was sort of like, I would just say Series B mid-stage. We were doing some product adjustments, and we had a product that wasn't working, and it was consuming, like, it was a capability of a product that actually wasn't working. It was a massive thesis, and it should have worked. It should have been compelling. We had all the customer feedback that it was going to be compelling and interesting, and it just wasn't landing. And our sales team was actually having a hard time on it. And our competitors were doing something else that was actually just landing more. And I would just say swallowing crow and actually shutting down the thing that was actually not working, and then going and out executing our competitors and extending the story that they actually did was humiliating for a moment of time. But it was a recognition that they were actually had found the vein in the market that was actually important and attentive. And it actually sort of like recaptured sort of like the imagination of customers, and it started working again. Uh, but sometimes you just make a bet, and it was a great bet. We've done all the homework, but someone else made another bet. And when customers had to actually pick, this is like 2012, 2013, when customers had to pick between the two bets, they're like, oh, I like this bet better. And we had to go sort of like reorient and pivot and re-accelerate. And we had like a small bet in that area, but we have to go re-accelerate and we executed well, and it actually made a massive difference. But if we had stayed with what we were doing for another year and not shut it down and reallocate it, we wouldn't be where we are today.
That transitions us nicely into the Mythbuster section. Because one of the questions that we get with founders, one of the myths that we hear a lot is that great products sell themselves. What's your thought about that?
Well, I would just say it's demonstrably false. Like if you look through the history of technology, the best products have not won in general in terms of feature and capabilities. I will say here's how I would actually reframe it. Products that fit into the best narrative themselves. And I think this is one thing that engineering founders are often challenged with. And by the way, this is a challenge I often have, is we tend to obsess with feature function on it, and we are inattentive to narrative. And so I do think products that actually sort of like have a great narrative in their category about what they're doing for their customers, about how they work, and that narrative shows up in the user experience. The narrative shows up in demos and trials. They actually are easier to sell. So what I wouldn't say is that they sell themselves, but there's a massive difference between a product that is hard to sell and a product that is easier to sell. So a product let's just take two good products. And I mean, they're good, but one's hard to sell and one's easy to sell. Well, the first thing is that the differentiation is nuanced. The second thing is that the need is a nice to have, but not an urgent, sort of like compelling, sort of like priority. Doesn't mean it's not a good product. Doesn't mean it doesn't do what it says. The third thing about the product that's hard to sell, that's still a good product, is that when you actually demo it, people are just like, oh, that's nice, but it doesn't create like I must have this now sort of like moment. It may take a long time to demo. Like the value may take a long time. Not a bad product, but like you just made that product much harder to sell. So the way I think about it is products that are easy to sell is that like it's obvious that basically like there's a pain point to be solved. The differentiation is not nuanced. This is where a lot of people get stuck, is nuanced differentiation versus clear differentiation. Is that like I can actually see the value in a 15-minute demo. The thing I always ask for people is just like, can I actually see where like I must have this in a 15-minute demo? And if I can't do that in less than 15 minutes, then like I've lost the game. Like it's hard. Now you're in the hard to sell. Like I should be able to do it within 10, but if I can't actually like create like, okay, wow, that's meaningful. And so where I orient people, it's not good products sell themselves. It's just that like you should actually manufacture a product that's actually easy to sell. And that is, as you say, built, not born, but like that is actually completely doable. But like it's hard to actually do that, where to actually make it where it's actually easy to sell. And oftentimes engineers tend to think that like I actually have a great product. And my point is there's great products that are hard to sell and great products that are easy to sell. And we can make great products that are easy to sell. And it has nothing to do with whether they're good or bad. It's just that how easy is it to sell.
I was having this debate with a founder the other day. Kurt, I'm sure you've heard this statement, but there's a phrase or a statement that goes around where everything in our organization should be centered around sales. And the founder is asking, doesn't that put sales on too much of a pedestal? And I think the statement maybe does, but the real thing that they're saying is that everything should be centered around the customer. And sales only as much as it's about serving the customer and getting the product into the customer's hand. So products that are able to, that you can show the value to a customer very quickly and easily, are super valuable.
And I think that's exactly it, because I think that's processing the sales as an organizational construct versus everything should be enabled about meaningful customer adoption. Like we want to make it very easy for customers to adopt in meaningful ways. And also we want to make it easy for customers to actually be so excited they tell others about their experience. Does it happen to be sales? Yes, but it's not sales as a function. It's sales as a velocity of adoption. So like if it's easy for a customer to adopt and customers feel compelled to tell other people you should do this, then I have a massive velocity of adoption. And that is everyone's responsibility. It's not about everything, it's about the sales function.
Another myth we hear a lot is that more funding solves all your scaling problems.
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed like that. If that was the case. One, Rapid7 was relatively, compared to others, capital efficient, especially sort of like in the build out. Look, there's a minimum efficient amount of funding, and then there's a maximum inefficient amount of funding. And so, because what happens is you can have so much funding, you lose discipline. And ultimately, when you're building a company, discipline is essential because you have to ask the hard questions. And like, discipline forces you to actually be tight about like what drives customer adoption, what's the customer feedback, what drives success. Startups are think about it, not just an innovation machine, they're an innovation discipline machine. Organizations that scale are disciplined about actually doing what works to actually drive more and more adoption over time. Now, you can't have too little investment where you're not providing the right level of service, support, you're not keeping up with market dynamics, and that is true. There's a too little. You can also have too much just as easily that actually loses the discipline and the focus, and you actually start chasing the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is, one. But like you start chasing sort of like things and you lose the customer focus. And so, the way that I think about it, there's a right amount of capital and it's a band. And by the way, that amount of capital should actually have tolerance for your inevitable missteps, which you'll absolutely make on the journey. But it actually should not have so much band that like it actually robs you of the discipline you actually need to really be successful.
And that actually segues nicely into the last myth that I did want to ask you about, which is this idea of the highest price is always the best term sheet.
Oh, I tell people, look, this goes back to my whole thing earlier about it is the intangibles are going to have more to do with your success than anything else. And so, here's a simple litmus test I give founders is that when you actually get the price, it's expand. So just like anything else, there's going to be some that are too cheap, but like focusing on just the top one, you need to ask yourself one essential question is when you inevitably screw up something, are these the people that you want to be in with to actually sort of like get out of the situation? Because if you are early stage, something is not gonna look. There's a thesis that says you do when you do it. There's a thesis that the founders actually give you, and we all know that basically something's wrong with that thesis. We don't know what it is, but we know something's wrong with it. Something is not going to go as the script is outlined. And the question really then becomes sort of like, who are the operators? Who are the investors? Who are the people that are actually going to still make that great? Because there's going to be so much good stuff. So the way I think about it is just like in any sort of like thing, in any sort of like outline, there's going to be sort of like 60% of it that's spot on and 40% of it that's garbage. The question is, how are people going to respond when we hit something that's actually not spot on? And then how do we retriangulate? How do we refocus? How do we reshift? And who do you want to be in the bunker with as you actually go with that? And so I think that that intangible is going to matter. Because what I remind founders, that is absolutely 100% guaranteed going to happen to you. By the way, I would not invest in a founder who actually thought that like the script was actually going to go exactly as written. The question is, when you go off script a little bit, how do you actually keep what's essential and how do you do it? And those are the intangibles. If you focus just on the dollars, then you may be sacrificing your ultimate success. Now, again, that doesn't mean you should actually sell yourself cheaply, but like it's understanding there's many things that are going to create success. And I think about like, what are the people that are going to be on the journeys when you actually hit the bumps in the road is going to be the most important thing.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, I do have one reflective question to give founders something to take with them and apply to their days as they are on their own journey, which is what's a leadership lesson that you wish more founders understood as they scale a company from the very early days up into large organizations?
I think gratitude. And here's what I mean by that is the hardest lesson I had to learn is that not everyone is going to be able to scale to every stage of the company. And that can often create a sense of crisis at some point when you actually have to change and switch leaders, functions, scale. Like you have to do different things because what got you here won't get you there. And it's very easy to either have a distorted view of loyalty, or it's very easy to be callous. And both of those are wrong. Like callousness is wrong because it doesn't have a set of gratitude. A distorted sense of loyalty is wrong because you're actually sacrificing the mission for something someone can't do anyway. And so gratitude is the way I think about it. It's like, it is the thank you. Here's where we're trying to go. I don't think this works here. Do you want to participate in a different way on this journey? But I'm not going to sacrifice the mission. So like, I can say, thank you. It's crusted here. Here's my concerns. Here's where we're going. I actually would love you to participate, but it's going to look different than that. Or do you want to go out and do something else? But like, let's figure this out together. But that is sort of like approaching it from a place of evolution and gratitude. I think actually is the learning about scaling that I've learned over time.
Fantastic. Corey, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and I know our listeners are going to agree. Where can they learn more about you and your work at Rapid7?
Oh, well, our technology and our work is at www.rapid7.com. And I'm excited by what we're sort of like building. So if they ever want to look at sort of like the journey there, I'll send you a couple of things. I've also done a couple of articles and speeches along the way that I can actually share. You can actually post that talks a little bit about my personal story.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Built Not Born, the podcast where we break down the real stories of startup execution. If you enjoyed this conversation with Corey Thomas, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And if you're a founder looking for guidance on scaling your startup, check out ventureguides.com. Thank you so much. Now let's get to work. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Built Not Born, the startup go-to-market podcast, is brought to you by Venture Guides. To find out more about Venture Guides and how our venture capital plus guiding model helps early stage startups build scalable go-to-market strategies and grow faster, visit ventureguides.com. And then make sure to search for Built Not Born in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, or anywhere else that you listen. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and we look forward to building with you. On behalf of the team here at Venture Guides, thanks for listening. Until next time, keep building.